Hello everybody, Sparkster1701 here. We're taking a look at one of the new MicroMaster sets. We have the Airstrike Patrol. Of course, we've only got two members of it in the modern era, whereas in the Generation 1 era we had four. But at least they're somewhat still similar. We have Whisper and Stormcloud. Well, Stormcloud carries the name over from his G1 version. Whisper is now called Visper, with a V instead of a WH. Again, trademark reasons. But all in all, they still appear to be the same characters. For those of you who may not be as familiar with them, Whisper would have been the leader of the Airstrike Patrol, and Stormcloud was basically his copy of Starscream, except for the fact that Stormcloud isn't as smart as Starscream. Just as mouthy, but with less brains. Just what you want on your team. At any rate, let's take a comparative look. We'll start with looking at Whisper, so we'll get the Stormclouds out of the way. Here's the G1 Whisper. And of course, all his articulation was he could move his arms up and down 180 degrees. He could bend his legs at the hips. And if we move the bit of his plane out of the way, he probably could move at the knee. Yeah, he can move at the knee, just in the opposite direction. Whereas Visper here improves upon it, as his arms are now on a ball joint, so he can rotate all the way around and raise his arm out that far. His legs are also on a ball joint, so they can do a full split at the hip, and he can raise his legs up, but he can only raise them up about so far. But he can put them out to the sides all the way. And he does have a joint at the knee, so he can bend his legs at the knee, but only so far. So he doesn't have a lot of range of motion, but he does pack quite a lot of range of motion into his tiny little body. Let's transform these two and compare their alternate modes. Now, in their alternate modes, as you can see, they did a lot to retain some of the look of the original, but go in its own way to be a Cybertronian version. So we could easily assume that Visper is intended to be a stealth fighter, like Whisper is. And of course, he's also a tad longer. So, a rather nice improvement on the two. And of course, like the original one could swoosh pretty good, this new one also swooshes pretty good for such a little tiny toy. Of course, he can afford to be a little bit bigger, as he's not competing with Micro Machines. But he's got more surprises, which we'll cover after we show Stormcloud. Now here we go with Stormcloud, Generation 1 version here. His articulation is more or less the same as Whisper's. The arms can be rotated 180 degrees. He can bend his legs at the hip, and also again at the knees, but he bends at the knees the opposite way. So it kind of makes him a little bit cramped. The new version of Stormcloud does retain the green face that the original one has, adds some new paint schemes. Of course, his hands are now the turbines for the jet, so I would assume that he has flamethrower hands now. But he can also move his arms all the way around, and he can raise them up about so far. And he also has a joint at his elbows for bending, so he's got even more range of motion. He can do a full splits with his legs. And of course, he can raise his legs all the way up at the hip, and he can also bend at the knee about 90 degrees. So all in all, Stormcloud tops his leader in that respect. Now let's compare their alternate modes. Now unfortunately on the alternate mode, Stormcloud kind of loses it. The original one, it's not bad when you compare it to what was available toy-wise at the time. It does become a pretty respectable looking airplane, and it does swoosh pretty good. The new one, however, due to the way they made his legs fold up for transforming, unfortunately poses a problem because you can see them from the top view. So unfortunately he kind of loses out, but we will give some kudos for retaining some of the color and retaining the color scheme of the original toy, but making him somewhat different. Since, of course, they're making him a Cybertronian vehicle, his design is radically different from the original, but it still captures some of what the original was intended to do. And, just like the other one, it swooshes pretty good, so I guess that's a minor flaw to look at in comparison. Now, like I said earlier, there is a bonus to these two. The Micromasters, save for the Soundwave Spy team, can be combined into forming a weapon for the larger Transformers. Let's combine these two guys together and see what we get. Of course, we'll get the photogenic flywheels out here to demonstrate this. This is the combined form for Visper and Stormcloud. They form, according to the instructions, a Circuit Stream Spy Blade. So, pretty much they form a large sword. And all in all, while it looks kind of silly, I'll give it that, it does add a new dimension of play with these guys. The Micromasters were always seen as a bit of a nuisance toy. So after all, they were just another small toy for our parents to step on. And with them being small, they could easily get lost. But this adds a new dimension to them, as now they can be combined into forming a rather bizarre looking weapon for the larger Transformers. And of course, so far, this is the only one that's a melee weapon, at least at the time of these being recorded. This is the only one that becomes a melee weapon. All the other ones that are out, again, at this recording, all became guns. So this is the only one that's a melee weapon. And by strange coincidence, the only Decepticon one available. Although another Decepticon unit is due out later this year. All in all, I kind of like it. I mean, it's not great, I'll give it that much. But I do like the extra addition of play for it. So, I think we'll run with it. At any rate, that concludes my comparison of the Airstrike Patrol. I certainly hope you all enjoyed it. If you liked this video, please leave me a thumbs up here on YouTube. If you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll be notified of future videos. And share your thoughts about the Airstrike Patrol in the comments down below. This is Sparkster1701 saying I will catch you all later.